The echo of chains. In the industrial labyrinth of culture, where the air was thick with soot and the clatter of machinery drowned even the loudest cries, Rail Draven lived a life of quiet obscurity. A mechanic by trade, he was known for his ingenuity, but dismissed as unremarkable in a world that valued survival over brilliance. His days revolved around scavenging parts from discarded mining bots and patching up broken machinery for the desperate workers of the sprawling factories. It was a life of routine, devoid of surprises, or so he thought. One fateful day, Rail ventured into an abandoned sector on the outskirts of the industrial sprawl, drawn by whispers of untouched technology hidden amidst the ruins. The air grew colder as he navigated the collapsing corridors, the distant hum of forgotten machinery vibrating under his boots. His flashlight beam flickered across walls covered in rust and grime, revealing cryptic markings that seemed out of place in the utilitarian world of culture. At the heart of the sector, he stumbled upon a massive steel door, its surface etched with glowing blue runes that pulsed like a heartbeat. The door exuded an ancient otherworldly energy, unlike anything Rail had encountered. His instincts urged him to turn back, but curiosity gripped him like a vice. With steady hands, he pried open the control panel beside the door, his tools sparking as he worked. The circuits were alien, their complexity far beyond the rudimentary systems he was accustomed to. Yet, with the resourcefulness that had kept him alive, Rail bypassed the ancient locks. The door groaned as it slid open, revealing a cavernous chamber bathed in dim, ethereal light. At its center stood a platform, and upon it lay a colossal wolf, its fur black as the void and its form, bound by chains that shimmered with an oppressive energy. The creature's golden eyes were closed, its chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The sight was mesmerizing, terrifying, and inexplicably sad. Rail approached cautiously, his footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. The wolf stirred as he drew near, its ears twitching before its eyes fluttered open. Golden orbs locked onto him, and a low growl rumbled through the air, resonating like distant thunder. Rail froze, every instinct screaming at him to flee. But there was something in the creature's gaze, an intelligence, a depth of emotion, that rooted him in place. "You're trapped," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The wolf didn't lunge or snarl. Instead, its growl softened into a low whine, its massive body slumping as if resigned to its fate. Rail's gaze shifted to the chains, their intricate runes radiating a cold alien energy. He reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing the surface of one chain. An icy pain shot through him, forcing him to pull back with a gasp. "Who did this to you?" he murmured, not expecting an answer. The wolf's eyes remained fixed on him, a silent plea shimmering within their depths. The chains, Rail realized, weren't just physical. "Almost there," he murmured, his voice tight with determination. "Just a little longer." With a final, desperate effort, the last chain snapped. The runes extinguished, and the chains fell away like lifeless serpents. The wolf staggered to its feet, its massive form trembling as it stretched its limbs and shook out its fur. Rail stepped back, his heart pounding. "Can you move?" he asked, his voice a mix of urgency and awe. "Because we got company." The wolf turned to him, its golden eyes glowing with an intensity that made Rail's breath catch. Then, to his utter shock, the creature spoke. "Thank you," it rumbled, its voice deep and resonant, reverberating through the chamber like an ancient echo. Before Rail could respond, the chamber's entrance burst open, revealing armed figures silhouetted against the flashing red lights. The wolf growled, a sound that promised destruction. Rail gripped his plasma torch tighter, his mind racing. Whatever came next, he realized there was no turning back. The hunter's awakening. The air in the chamber crackled with tension as the intruders poured in. Their boots struck the metallic floor in synchronized precision, a sound that sent a shiver down Rail's spine. These weren't just scavengers or factory guards. They were something far more dangerous. Clad in black armor adorned with glowing insignias, their faces hidden behind opaque helmets, they moved with a chilling efficiency. Rail barely had time to process their arrival before one of them barked an order. Secure the perimeter. The guardian must not escape. The wolf, no longer bound by its chains, bared its teeth in a feral snarl, the deep rumble reverberating through the cavern. Its golden eyes locked onto the intruders, flickering with an intensity that seemed almost alive. Rail took an involuntary step back, the plasma torch shaking in his grip. "What have I gotten myself into?" he muttered under his breath. The leader of the group stepped forward, a towering figure with a presence as cold as the steel surrounding them. In one hand, he held a staff crackling with blue energy, the weapon's glow matching the now extinguished runes of the wolf's former chains. "You've meddled in forces beyond your understanding," the leader said, his voice distorted by the helmet's modulator. "Step aside, human. The creature is property of the Order." Rail's heart raced. He had no idea who these people were, but the way they spoke about the wolf, like it was a thing to be owned, ignited a spark of defiance within him. He tightened his grip on the plasma torch, though he knew it was a feeble defense against their advanced weapons. "Property," Rail retorted, forcing his voice to stay steady. "That's no thing. It's alive, and it doesn't belong to you." The wolf growled in agreement, its massive frame lowering as if preparing to pounce. The leader tilted his head, almost amused. "You're bold for a mechanic. Foolish, but bold. Stand down, or you'll share the beast's fate." Rail glanced at the wolf, who met his gaze with a silent understanding. He didn't know why he felt a connection to the creature, but in that moment, he knew he couldn't abandon it. "I've come this far," he muttered to himself. "No turning back now." The wolf sprang into action, moving with a speed that defied its massive size. Its claws tore through the nearest soldier, sending him sprawling to the ground. Chaos erupted as the other intruders opened fire, their energy weapons lighting up the dim chamber in flashes of blue and white. Rail dove for cover behind a crumbling console, his heart hammering in his chest. The wolf was a blur of black and gold, its movements a deadly dance of fury and precision. But even as it tore through the ranks of its captors, the odds were overwhelming. "I can't just sit here," Rail thought, adrenaline surging through him. He scanned the room, searching for anything that could tip the balance. His eyes landed on the central node, the same one he'd disabled to free the wolf. Sparks still danced around its exposed conduits, and an idea began to form. Rail scrambled toward the node, keeping low to avoid the crossfire. His hands flew over the controls, rewiring circuits, and rerouting power. The wolf's growl filled the chamber, followed by the screams of another soldier. Rail's pulse raced as he worked, every second feeling like an eternity. Finally, with a triumphant cry, he slammed a lever into place. The chamber's lights flickered before plunging into darkness. A deafening hum filled the air as the node overloaded, unleashing a pulse of energy that sent a shockwave through the room. When the lights returned, the scene was one of utter devastation. The intruders lay scattered, their armor sparking and smoking. The wolf stood at the center, its chest heaving as it surveyed the carnage. Rail emerged from his hiding spot, his legs trembling. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice barely audible. The wolf turned to him, its golden eyes glowing softly. "You are resourceful, human," it said, its voice carrying a note of respect. "But this is far from over." Rail swallowed hard. What were they after? Why do they want you so badly? The wolf lowered its massive head, its gaze distant. "I am the last of the guardians, protectors of the ancient realms. Long ago, my kind was betrayed, imprisoned by those who sought to harness our power. These hunters are remnants of that betrayal, their order sworn to ensure we never rise again." Rail felt a chill run down his spine. "Why now? Why were you still here, bound like that?" "I was forgotten," the wolf replied, a trace of bitterness in its voice. But your world's greed for ancient technology awakened them. They found me, but they couldn't destroy me. So they chose to enslave me instead. Rael's mind raced. The implications of the wolf's words were staggering. This wasn't just about him or the creature. This was a conflict spanning centuries, a legacy of betrayal and oppression. What do we do now? Rael asked, his voice laced with determination. The wolf straightened, its massive form exuding a quiet strength. We fight, but not here. There are others like them, and they will come. We must leave this place and prepare for what's to come. Rael hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He was just a mechanic, a nobody in the grand scheme of things, yet here he was, standing at the precipice of something far greater than himself. "All right," he said finally. "But you better not eat me if this goes sideways." The wolf let out a low, rumbling chuckle. "You have my word." Together, they turned toward the chamber's exit, the path ahead uncertain but united in purpose. The wolf moved with newfound vigor, its steps lighter now that it was free. Rael followed close behind, his plasma torch in hand, ready for whatever lay ahead. Unbeknownst to them, far above the ruins, a fleet of ships was descending on Kuchar, their insignias glowing with the same eerie blue light as the wolf's former chains. The battle was just beginning. Shadows of the past. The tunnels were suffocatingly silent as Rael and the wolf moved through the maze of abandoned corridors. The faint hum of distant machinery echoed like ghosts of a once thriving industrial empire. Rael's mind churned with questions, but the weight of the wolf's presence beside him kept him silent. Its massive form glided through the darkness with an eerie grace, its golden eyes scanning every shadow. "What should I call you?" Rael finally asked, breaking the silence. His voice sounded small against the vast emptiness of the passage. The wolf didn't look at him as it answered. "I was called Arian in the old tongue, though the name holds little meaning now." Rael nodded, unsure what to say. Arian. The name sounded ancient, like it carried the weight of entire civilizations. As they pressed forward, the tunnels began to widen, the air growing colder with each step. The dim light from overhead conduits flickered, casting strange shapes on the walls. Rael's boots crunched against debris, while Arian's steps were soundless. "What's out there?" Rael asked hesitantly. "You said we're not safe. Who are these people, really? And why did they call you a guardian?" Arian's golden eyes flicked toward him. "You ask much for one who knows little." Rael bristled. "Well, excuse me for not being up to speed on ancient wolf lore. I've been busy trying to survive in this rust bucket of a world." Arian paused, his gaze softening slightly. "Fair, you deserve answers, though they will bring little comfort." Rael stopped walking and crossed his arms. "Try me." Arian exhaled deeply, the sound more like a rumble. "Long ago, my kind were the protectors of balance. We were guardians, beasts forged by the hands of the first makers, imbued with power beyond comprehension. Our purpose was to shield the realms from those who sought dominion through chaos. But power breeds envy, and envy turns to betrayal." Rael's pulse quickened. He had always dismissed stories of the ancient realms as myths, bedtime tales, spun to distract children from the harshness of reality. Hearing it from Arian, however, made it feel uncomfortably real. "What happened?" Rael asked, his voice hushed. "The order happened," Arian said bitterly. "A faction of the first makers turned against their own creations, fearing that we would one day rise against them. They forged chains not of metal, but of essence, symbols of betrayal and control. My kin were hunted, one by one, until none remained, or so they thought." Rael frowned. "But you survived." Arian's ears twitched. "Survival is not victory. I was bound, hidden beneath the surface of this dying world, my existence erased from history. And now, after centuries of silence, the Order hunts again." The revelation sent a chill through Rael, He had unwittingly stepped into a conflict older than he could comprehend. Yet, amidst the fear, he felt a spark of resolve. He had freed Arion, and now he was part of this. Before he could respond, the ground beneath them shook violently, dust cascading from the ceiling. A distant roar echoed through the tunnels, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of metallic footsteps. "They found us," Arion growled, his fur bristling. Rael's heart leaped into his throat. "What do we do?" Arion crouched low, his golden eyes narrowing. "We fight. But first, we must give them the chase." Without another word, Arion darted ahead, his massive frame moving like a shadow. Rael cursed under his breath and sprinted after him, his plasma torch clutched tightly in his hand. The sound of pursuit grew louder, the hunters relentless in their approach. The tunnel opened into a cavernous chamber, its ceiling disappearing into darkness. Rusted machinery lay scattered like the bones of ancient beasts, and faint shafts of light pierced through cracks in the walls. Arion stopped in the center of the room, his ears twitching. "Here," he said, "we make our stand." Rael skidded to a halt beside him, panting. "Are you crazy? There's no cover here." Arion ignored him, his gaze fixed on the far side of the chamber. The first of the hunters appeared, their black armor glinting in the dim light. They moved with precision, their weapons trained on the wolf. "Guardian Arion," the leader called, his voice cold and authoritative. "You cannot escape. Submit, and we may yet show mercy." Arion's lips curled into a snarl. "Mercy is not your way." The leader raised his weapon. "Then you leave us no choice." Rael barely had time to react before the room erupted into chaos. Arion surged forward, a blur of black and gold. His claws tore through the first line of hunters, their cries lost in the cacophony of battle. Rael ducked behind a piece of machinery, his heart pounding as he tried to think of a way to help. His eyes fell on a control panel embedded in the floor. The machinery around them might be ancient, but it wasn't dead. Rael's fingers flew over the controls, rerouting power to dormant systems. With a groan, the chamber came to life. Massive gears turned, and a crane swung into motion, scattering the hunters. Arion used the distraction to his advantage, his movements swift and brutal. But even as he fought, more hunters poured into the room, their weapons glowing with lethal energy. "Rael." Arion's voice cut through the chaos. "We must retreat. This fight is lost." Rael hesitated, his pride warring with his survival instinct. But the truth was undeniable. They were outnumbered, and the hunters showed no signs of stopping. "Fine," he shouted, abandoning the control panel. "But we're going to need an exit." Arion growled in agreement, his eyes scanning the room. He spotted a narrow passage on the far side of the chamber, barely visible amidst the rubble. "There." Rael nodded, adrenaline surging as he bolted toward the passage. Arion followed, his massive form shielding Rael from the hunter's fire. The two disappeared into the darkness, leaving the chaos of the chamber behind. As they ran, the sound of pursuit faded, but Rael knew it was only a matter of time before the hunters caught up. "This isn't over," he panted, glancing at Arion. "No," the wolf agreed, his golden eyes glowing with determination. "It has only begun." A beacon in the ashes, the passage narrowed as Rael and Arion pressed forward, the air growing heavier with each step. The faint hum of distant machinery had faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow sound. Arion moved ahead, his golden eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, a beacon of purpose in the endless darkness. Rael followed close behind, his thoughts a storm of uncertainty. "Where does this lead?" Rael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Arion didn't turn back. "To the surface, if we are fortunate. But fortune has not favored me for centuries." Rael grimaced. The wolf's words carried a weight that was hard to ignore. He tightened his grip on the plasma torch, its soft hum a small comfort in the suffocating gloom. They emerged into a cavern larger than anything Rael had seen before. Massive pillars, carved with symbols similar to those on Arion's chains, reached toward the ceiling, disappearing into the shadows. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of ozone. At the center of the cavern stood an obelisk, its surface glowing with a faint blue light. Arion stopped abruptly, his ears twitching. "This place," he murmured, his voice tinged with something Rael couldn't quite place. Was it awe or dread? Rael stepped beside him, squinting at the obelisk. "What is it?" Arion's gaze remained fixed on the structure. A waypoint. The Guardians used them to communicate and travel between realms. I did not expect to find one here. Rael tilted his head. Communicate? With who? Arion didn't answer immediately. Instead, he padded toward the obelisk, his movements cautious. The glowing symbols pulsed faintly as he approached, as though recognizing his presence. "Perhaps the others," Arion said finally, his voice heavy with doubt. Rael's eyes widened. "Others? You mean there might be more of you out there?" Arion hesitated before nodding. "If they live, they are hidden. But this beacon could reach them, if its power remains intact." Rael's heart raced. The idea of more guardians, beings like Arion, ancient and powerful, was both thrilling and terrifying. He approached the obelisk, his hand reaching out instinctively. "Careful," Arion warned, his voice sharp. Rael paused, his fingers hovering just shy of the glowing surface. "What happens if I touch it?" "The beacon reads essence," Arion explained. "If you are unworthy, it will reject you." Violently. Rael pulled his hand back, eyeing the obelisk warily. "Good to know." As Arion began to circle the structure, studying its symbols, a faint vibration rippled through the ground. Rael froze, his breath catching. "Arion," he said, his voice tinged with alarm. The wolf's ears twitched, and his golden eyes narrowed. "They're coming." The vibration grew stronger, accompanied by a distant roar that echoed through the cavern. Rael's mind raced. The hunters were relentless, and this time there would be no running. "We can't stay here," Rael said, panic creeping into his voice. Arion stepped toward him, his massive frame exuding a calm authority. "We do not run. Not this time." Rael blinked. "What are you talking about?" "There are too many of them." Arion's gaze softened, but his voice remained firm. "This place is sacred. If they reach it, they will defile it, as they have defiled everything else. I will not allow that." Rael opened his mouth to argue but stopped when he saw the determination in Arion's eyes. The wolf wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting for something far greater. "What do we do?" Rael asked, his voice steadier now. Arion turned toward the obelisk, his golden eyes glowing brighter. "Activate the beacon. If the others hear its call, they may come." Rael swallowed hard. "And if they don't?" "Then we fight alone." Before Rael could respond, the first of the hunters appeared at the far end of the cavern. Their black armor glinted in the obelisk's light, and their weapons hummed ominously. Arion growled, his fur bristling. "Buy me time," he said, stepping toward the obelisk. Rael's stomach churned, but he nodded. He ducked behind a nearby pillar, his plasma torch clutched tightly in his hand. The hunters spread out, their movements precise as they approached. "You're surrounded," one of them called. "Surrender, and your deaths will be swift." Rael gritted his teeth. "Yeah, I'll pass on that." He activated the plasma torch, its blade igniting with a hiss. With a burst of adrenaline, he leaped out from cover, the torch slicing through the air. The first hunter didn't see it coming, his weapon clattering to the ground as he fell. The others turned their attention to Rael, their weapons blazing. He ducked and weaved, the heat of their energy blasts searing the air around him. Behind him, Arion placed a massive paw on the obelisk, his golden eyes closing as he focused. The symbols on the structure pulsed more brightly, the blue light spreading outward like ripples in a pond. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster." Rail shouted, narrowly avoiding a blast that singed his jacket. Arion didn't respond, his focus unwavering. The obelisk began to hum, the sound growing louder with each passing second. The cavern itself seemed to vibrate, the air thick with an ancient power. The hunters faltered, their movements hesitant as they sensed the shift. One of them barked an order, but it was drowned out by the obelisk's growing resonance. Suddenly, a beam of light shot upward from the obelisk, piercing the darkness above. The ground shook violently, and the hunters stumbled, their formation breaking. Arion's eyes snapped open, his voice echoing through the cavern. "It is done." Rail didn't have time to ask what that meant. The ground beneath the hunters erupted, massive roots bursting forth and ensnaring them. The hunters screamed as the roots dragged them down, their weapons useless against the ancient force. Rail stared in stunned silence as the last of the hunters disappeared, the cavern falling eerily quiet. Arion stepped toward him, his golden eyes glowing faintly. "The beacon has been lit. Now, we wait." Rail nodded, his breath still coming in ragged gasps. "Let's hope your friends show up soon." Above them, the beam of light continued to shine, a beacon in the ashes of a forgotten world. Allies in the light. The beam of light from the obelisk reached high into the dark sky, a piercing ray that seemed to split the heavens. Rail stood at its base, his chest rising and falling as he struggled to catch his breath. Beside him, Arion was a picture of unshaken resolve, his golden eyes fixed on the beacon. "What happens now?" Rail asked, his voice hoarse. Arion's ears twitched, his gaze unwavering. "Now we see if the ancient bonds still hold. If they do, we won't be alone for long." Rail wiped sweat from his brow, eyeing the beam warily. "And if they don't?" Arion turned to him, the faintest hint of a growl in his voice. "Then we fight, just as we always have." The cavern fell silent again, save for the soft hum of the obelisk. The roots that had ensnared the hunters were now still, their ancient tendrils resting like dormant servants. Rail paced nervously, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "How do you even know anyone's out there?" he pressed. "You said the Guardians were wiped out. What if there's no one left to answer?" Arion closed his eyes, his massive frame radiating a quiet strength. "Hope is not a certainty, human. It is a choice, and it is the only choice I have left." Rail opened his mouth to reply, but stopped when he noticed something strange. The air around the obelisk was shimmering, as though reality itself were bending. A low hum began to build, growing louder with each passing second. "What's happening?" Rail asked, his heart pounding. Arion's ears perked up, his posture shifting. "They are coming." Before Rail could process the words, the shimmering intensified. Shapes began to emerge within the light, silhouettes that grew sharper with every pulse of the obelisk. They were massive, their forms unfamiliar yet undeniably alive. The first figure stepped forward, and Rail's breath caught in his throat. It was a wolf, similar to Arion, but with fur as white as snow and eyes that glowed like silver moons. The second followed, its frame smaller but no less imposing, its coat shimmering with hues of deep bronze. More emerge, each one unique, their presence filling the cavern with a palpable energy. Arion stepped forward, his voice reverent. "Brothers, sisters, you have answered." The white wolf tilted its head, its gaze soft but piercing. "Arion, we thought you lost." "I was," Arion replied, his voice steady. "But the call has been lit. The order rises again, and we must stand together." The bronze wolf growled low, its eyes narrowing. "The order has grown bold. To strike again after all this time. They must believe us broken. They will find they are mistaken," Arion said firmly. Rail watched the exchange in stunned silence, his mind struggling to keep up. Not to interrupt, but who are these guys? The white wolf turned its gaze to him, and Rail felt a strange warmth, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. You must be the human who freed Arion. For that, you have our gratitude." Rail scratched the back of his neck. "Yeah, well, he kind of freed himself. I just helped a little." Arion huffed, the sound almost amused. "Humility does not suit you, Rail." The white wolf stepped closer, its movements graceful yet commanding. "I am Caliph, once a guardian of the Western Reach. These are my kin. Together, we were the vanguard, protectors of the ancient realms." Rail nodded slowly, still trying to wrap his head around what he was seeing. "So, what now? Do you guys just go out there and start fighting the Order?" Caliph's expression darkened. "The Order is not a foe to be taken lightly. They have had centuries to prepare, while we have been scattered and dormant. We cannot simply charge into battle." Arion stepped forward. "Then what do you propose?" Caliph glanced at the other wolves, their silent exchange carrying a weight that spoke of shared history. "We rebuild," she said finally. "If the beacon still functions, there may be others who can answer its call. We must find them before the Order strikes again." Rail frowned. "And what happens in the meantime? It's not like the Order is going to sit around waiting for you to regroup." The bronze wolf growled, its sharp teeth glinting in the obelisk's light. "Let them come. They will find we are not as weak as they believe." Caliph nodded. "We hold this ground. If the Order wishes to claim it, they will face us together." Rail sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Great. So I guess I'm stuck here too." Arion turned to him, his golden eyes gleaming. "You chose this path, human. Now you walk it with us." Rail groaned. "Figures. I just wanted to fix bots and scavenge parts. And now I'm in the middle of an ancient war." Caliph's expression softened. "You may find, Rail, that the smallest gears can turn the greatest machines." Rail snorted. "Yeah, well, I hope this machine comes with instructions." The wolves shared a quiet moment of understanding before Caliph raised her head, her voice firm. "Prepare yourselves. The Order will not delay long. When they come, we will show them that the Guardians are not so easily broken." Arion stepped beside her, his posture tall and unwavering. Rail took a deep breath and tightened his grip on the plasma torch. The obelisk's beam continued to shine, its light cutting through the darkness like a promise of what was to come. The first strike. The beam of light from the obelisk shimmered against the cavern walls, casting the gathered Guardians in an ethereal glow. Their presence filled the chamber with a quiet, unyielding power, a stark contrast to the uneasy tension gnawing at Rail. Despite their strength, he couldn't shake the feeling that the battle ahead would be unlike anything he had faced before. Caliph's voice broke the silence, calm but commanding. "The Order will not allow this beacon to remain lit. They will come, and when they do, they will bring the full weight of their power." Arion stepped forward, his golden eyes burning with defiance. "Then we meet them here. Let them see what they have awakened." Rail raised a hand hesitantly, not to question the strategy, but isn't this a bit exposed? What's stopping them from just bombing this whole place from orbit? Caliph turned her gaze to him, her silver eyes steady. "The obelisk anchors this space. It is bound to the fabric of their own existence. Destroying it would destabilize their power as much as ours. They won't risk it." Rail exhaled slowly, unsure whether that was comforting or terrifying. "Good to know." Suddenly, the faint hum of the obelisk shifted, a low vibration rippling through the air. The wolves tensed, their ears twitching in unison. Rail felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "They're here," Caliph said softly. From the far end of the cavern, a cold, mechanical voice echoed, amplified by unseen devices. "Guardians, you cling to a past that no longer exists. Surrender the beacon, and we may grant you mercy." The Guardians formed a defensive line, their powerful forms radiating a quiet menace. Caliph stepped forward, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Mercy from the Order is a lie. If you wish to take this ground, come and claim it." A pause, pregnant with tension. Then the sound of approaching footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and unrelenting. The first figures emerged from the shadows, their armor glinting like dark steel, their weapons humming with deadly energy. Rael swallowed hard. "I hope you guys have a plan." Arion didn't look back. "Survive. That is the plan." The cavern exploded into chaos. The Order's soldiers opened fire, their energy weapons lighting up the chamber in blinding flashes. The Guardians moved as one, their massive forms surging forward with a ferocity that left Rael breathless. Arion leaped toward the nearest group of soldiers, his claws tearing through their ranks like a whirlwind of shadow and gold. Calith was a blur of white, her movements precise and lethal. She wove between the enemy lines, her jaws snapping and her claws leaving trails of destruction. The bronze wolf, smaller but no less fierce, charged headfirst into the fray, a guttural roar shaking the ground as it slammed into the enemy with devastating force. Rael ducked behind a fallen pillar, his heart hammering in his chest. He fumbled with his plasma torch, its blue blade flickering to life. "Okay, Rael," he muttered to himself. "Don't die." Simple plan. A shadow loomed over him, and he turned just in time to see one of the soldiers bearing down on him. The soldier's weapon glowed ominously, but Rael acted on instinct. He lunged forward, the plasma torch slicing through the soldier's weapon and armor in one fluid motion. Sparks flew, and the soldier crumpled to the ground. "Not bad for a mechanic," Rael muttered, his adrenaline surging. The battle raged on, the cavern a cacophony of snarls, roars, and the crackling of energy weapons. Despite their strength, the Guardians were outnumbered, and the Order's forces pressed their advantage. "Rael." Arion's voice cut through the chaos. Rael turned to see Arion pinned beneath a collapsing section of machinery, his golden eyes blazing with fury. Without thinking, Rael sprinted toward him, weaving through the chaos. "Hold on," Rael shouted, dropping to his knees beside the trapped wolf. He gritted his teeth and activated the plasma torch, cutting through the twisted metal with frantic precision. Arion growled, his muscles straining as he pushed against the debris. "Hurry, human." "I'm trying." Rael snapped, sweat pouring down his face. With a final, desperate effort, the last piece of metal gave way, and Arion sprang free. The wolf shook himself off, his eyes meeting Rael's. "You fight well for one so small," Arion said, his voice tinged with respect. Rael smirked despite himself. "And you're not bad for a giant wolf." Their brief moment of camaraderie was shattered by a deafening explosion. The obelisk pulsed violently, its light flickering as a massive figure stepped into the cavern. Rael's stomach dropped. The newcomer was unlike any of the soldiers, taller, more imposing, its armor glowing with intricate runes. In its hands, it held a massive weapon, its edges crackling with energy. Calith snarled, her silver eyes narrowing. "An enforcer." Arion's growl rumbled like thunder. "They're elite. This will not be easy." Rael glanced between them, his palms slick with sweat. It hasn't exactly been a picnic so far. The enforcer raised its weapon, its cold voice echoing through the cavern. "You will kneel." Arion stepped forward, his golden eyes blazing. "Not today." With a deafening roar, the Guardians surged forward once more, their combined strength colliding with the enforcer's unyielding might. Rael tightened his grip on the plasma torch, his resolve hardening. If this was the end, he wasn't going down without a fight.